Hi, everybody. My name is Kadir Toktogulf. I'm the Executive Director of Central Eurasia Leadership Academy, and I've been a part of CELA since the summer of 2007, when I attended CELA 6 Academy. I'm thrilled about today's webinar offered to us by our dear friend Paulette. Because of her active participation in all the leadership academies and masterclasses, Paulette has become a close friend to many of us. It's also a special day for Paulette, as today is her birthday. It's so special that you decided to share your birthday with us, Paulette. I'm wishing you a very happy birthday, and I'm sure that many more people will be writing their birthday wishes for you in the chat box below. The title of today's webinar is Resilient Leaders Embody Emotional Intelligence. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to CELA's social media channels later. Also, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions after Paulette's presentation. There's a chat box which you could use to interact with each other, but also with panelists. But I will be reading if there's something important for Paulette. And there's also a Q&A box, which you should actually use for your questions. Let me tell a little bit. We all know Paulette, but let me tell you a little bit about her impressive background before handing over the microphone to her. Paulette Pidcock is a certified executive leadership coach and founding president of Pidcock Coaching Partners. During her decades as a successful corporate lobbyist and leader in Washington, D.C., Paulette has created her coaching business to make a difference in the lives of her clients. She brings extensive real-life experiences and expertise to her strategies, skills, and knowledge of what contributes to effective and transformational leadership. Paulette partners with her clients in their journey to being an effective leader with vision, purpose, and values, inspiring trust while working for change. Paulette spent her corporate career as a government relations executive for 3 multi-billion-dollar energy and utility holding companies, where her leadership skills, policy expertise, and relationship prowess earned her respect within her corporations, industry associations, professional organizations, and on Capitol Hill. Paulette earned her leadership coaching certificate from Georgetown University and is a member of the International Coaching Federation. She holds a Master of Arts degree from the University of Maryland. Paulette has created and delivered transformational leadership programs for mid-level career professionals, specializing in government affairs in the Washington, D.C. area. As a member of the SIBF, Society of International Business Fellows, she has served as a volunteer leadership facilitator in International Transformational Leadership Academies in Southeast Asia, CELA, Central Eurasia, CELA, and Middle East, MELA, as well as in the United States. Overall, she facilitated 17 leadership academies and masterclasses, and Paulette hopes to add to that number once this pandemic is over. Thank you very much, Paulette, for your time, for your commitment to the network, and for sharing your expertise and knowledge and wisdom with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Kadir, and thank you all for joining me today and all of our members on the call. It's a great network and it's a great party for my birthday. So thank you for being here. And as we had talked about before we started the official program, Kadir and I wanted to have the opportunity for as many people for the few minutes before we started to at least see each other and to say hello. I really miss being with all of you and cannot wait until our next leadership program, whenever that is. So thank you very much. So we're going to share the screen. This VUCA world slide that I have up, I think pretty much speaks for itself. And it's, we've had a heck of a 2020. The COVID, we've had the economic crisis, and this is global. We have protesters. We've got protesters around the world. And of course, the elections. And here in the US and Kyrgyzstan had your elections, and there may be others. So in the chat, would you just put maybe 1 or 2 words about how are you feeling today? Today, December 2nd. Just how are you feeling? So I'll give maybe about 30 seconds. And Kadir, as those comments come in, perhaps you can read them.
Carla Gach says enthusiastic. Chingiz Kanapianov of CELA, great. Shirzot says tired. Sala, energized. Talgat, perfect. These are some of the answers that you could see in the chat box. Exhausted from Gabrielle.
Yeah. And I'm hearing some well-recognized names. So I'm so happy that everyone has been able to be on the call today. So in times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. This is actually a quote that is from Eric Hoffer, who's referred to as a longshoreman philosopher. So it's really an interesting use of words. So the future belongs to the learners and not the knowers. So my intention for our time together today is to be in service to you and to support you as a leader with the learner's mind. So I'm curious, what is your intention for today's meeting? You might just want to jot that down in your notes. So why are we here? We're going to be learning more about resilience, to have some inquiry around resilience, resilient leadership and resilient leaders. What do they look like? The title of this presentation is Embodying Emotional Intelligence for those resilient leaders. We'll spend more time talking about emotional intelligence. There may be a wide span of understanding of what that means for the people on the call. We're going to be spending a lot of time on just one of the skills as part of emotional intelligence, and that is self-awareness. That is the basis of everything. When we talk about emotional intelligence, we talk about relationships and so on. And then we'll go and spend some time talking about empathy and some reflection and Q&A, as Kadir had mentioned. So resilience, what is resilience? It's about the whole person. It's about the human capacity to meet adversity. It's not bouncing back. And I think that needs to be emphasized, but rather moving through all that we're all going through in this crazy year to be a better person as we move through this. It's a crucial characteristic of high-performing leaders. It's resilience and grit, relationships based on trust, a secure basis. And this is very important. What happens to us becomes a part of us. We will carry this through to 2021 and into the future. I want to just take this time, and many, if not most of the people on today's call have been through the Lifeline exercise that we do in our academies. It's one of the first things we do. We look at that, we think about those key points in our life, those defining moments. We do the visual. And what we're looking for is what is in our life experiences and how is that shaping us? And how often we use the word resilience. Gosh, I got through that. I am resilient. I can face the next situation. There's people on this call from Lebanon who have been through so much. There have been so many experiences that many of us have had. So it's going through hard times is one of the most powerful forces in life. It can bring out the best in us or the worst. So the choice is ours. Also, part of our programs, we talk about our core values. We do a lot of work around values. We have I love this quote, and this is from an article that I'll be referencing more, is an article written by Deloitte. They did a lot of work, especially in the earlier part of COVID in the spring, about resilient leadership. And in the crucible of crisis, resilient leaders are defined by who they are. And it's that, who they are. Who are we? Again, we've spent time, but each academy, each time I'm facilitate, I'm learning more about myself. So think about what your core values, how you're using them. Are you seeing your resilience being built up? Are you finding the inner strength? Are you coping better and moving through the challenges so that we can recover with strength, optimism, and flexibility? Are we finding meaning to survive and grow? And I think we've heard that once or twice before in some of our programs. So a quote from Nietzsche is, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." So a lot of what we've been picking up from our programs are the core elements into what makes a resilient leader. So from the study that I mentioned, I got really excited about this because it's 5 qualities of resilient leaders. And again, what they really emphasized, which really rang true to me, is to design from the heart and the head. It's not just about the head. Serve the heart of your organization, your purpose, and your social obligations while simultaneously making hard decisions to protect financial viability. So to me, it's giving me the opportunity to be who I always have been. I've always operated from the heart, but I also have an ability to make decisions. So we can do this together. So some of this message is for those who may not know much about emotional intelligence, or who lead much more with the left side of our brain, which is the logic side of our brain, that to get, to increase your leadership skills, you really need to understand emotional intelligence. And so to have some, firms and articles just saying, hey, it's time to be thinking about our workforce. They also went on to talk about 4 other elements, and I do want to obviously mention these, which is mission. You have to stabilize today to spark innovation tomorrow. Speed over elegance, decisive action with courage. Own your narrative, compelling future and path forward. Embrace the long view, stay focused to instill confidence. So those 4 elements or qualities are very common business qualities. And today's presentation is much more on the first quality, which is, of course, the heart and the head. A quote from Viktor Frankl: "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." And we all have been challenged to change ourselves to deal with everything that COVID, the economic crisis, and so on is throwing at us. So the article I've noted down at the bottom is "The Heart of Resilient Leadership Responding to COVID-19." It's again a March 2020 Deloitte. So the emotional intelligence, it's quite a few skills that go into emotional intelligence. And we'll be referring to that, a lot of times as EI. But what we're going to spend time today is on the first, as I mentioned earlier, self-awareness, recognizing our emotions and their impact on others. It is so critical. And we're going to be spending time looking at what emotions are, also what emotional triggers are, what's going on in our brain, what's happening here. So we're going to spend some time on empathy, understanding how others are feeling, less time on these others, which is motivation, self-regulation, and social skills, all very important, but we only have 60 minutes. So we're going to do, let me go back to that because I'd like to ask, just to put in the chat, are your skills, emotional intelligence skills, how would you rate yourself? And why don't we do, well, poor, good, very good. So again, about 30 seconds, just put in, so we get a sense of people's comfort level with these particular skills. So Kadir, as those come across, perhaps you can.
Rebecca says between good and very good. Bill Starnes, good. Pretty, good. Irene, good. Kanat, good. Shirzat, self-awareness. Malafiza, sorry if I mispronounced, very good. Susan, good and learning to be better. Jehun, good. Meet, good. Some good from Karlagach. And Nancy, good. Zara says good. So these are some of the answers to your question.
Great, thank you. So I applaud everyone for being here to learn more about emotional intelligence. There's so much, and it will take us to the next level. I also want to say, for those who may have noted as being very good with their understanding of emotional intelligence, I want to take this opportunity, first of all, to congratulate those of you who are aware of these skills and their importance, and also to challenge those who have very good skills to be coaching your workforce, to be living these skills of self-awareness and listening and empathy, because there are a lot of people who do not really have a very good handle on this, and we can be a huge source of inspiration and coaching. So think about that. Another visual model, this is Daniel Goleman's model that we often see. I'm not going to go through all of this, but if you look on the first row, the personal competence and the self-awareness, again, what we're talking about, the self-management and regulation is absolutely critical. And we'll touch on that when we talk about the brain science. And then social competence, social awareness, relationship management. As Kadir mentioned, I was a lobbyist for 35 years in Washington. And the social awareness, the relationship management was critical to me doing as an effective job as possible. And thinking back for myself, just my own short story is having the intuitiveness of walking into a member's office and perhaps just seeing what's on the walls, what kind of artwork, what kind of paintings or so make this person his or her office, what other pictures are on the cabinets and so on. So it's really seeing what is important to the other person as you start. You could be in sales. They're very similar. One is doing policy, the other might be doing a product. So let's start with the self-awareness. We've got secret to our personal and professional success. It's amazing. And start looking at folks that you interface with and notice how much self-awareness they may have. Are they talking all the time, or are they listening? Recognize our emotions and the impact on others, and build habits through practices of mindfulness. If you haven't developed a practice up until now, think seriously about doing that, doing perhaps journaling, some form of inner thinking and what, asking yourself, what is going on? Emotions. I just love this cartoon. Dealing with emotions is a key leadership skill. So it's important to recognize emotion, to understand the cause and consequences, how to regulate it, determine the quality of our lives, and occur in every relationship that we care about. Emotional triggers are caused by reality in our lives. Just think about that. Caused by reality in our lives. Varies with each person because it's our life. Learn to identify what bothers us. Develop a strong inner voice to help us navigate through. So I want to spend just a couple minutes about an emotional trigger that some on this call will recognize because I've either experienced it with them or talked with them about it. But, and it's really a trigger that I just learned was something important to me the last year or two. In the business world in the 80s and the 90s, I was in a profession which was male dominated, and my industry was energy, so lots of engineers, again, male dominated. And women were just coming into that line of work, being recognized for their skills. And you can imagine being in these meetings with predominantly males, and I'm going to say this in a way that's probably more graphic, but sort of clawing as one of the few females to be recognized, to be respected. So that was one of these realities in my life. So starting, actually, this was in the domestic program, starting as a co-facilitator, I had an experience with my co-facilitator, a male, who was, he and I had been working together to prepare ourselves for what was going to happen in our learning group. And so as we are starting our learning group, I'm noticing that it's like all the oxygen is being sucked out of the air by this gentleman's talking and taking over the conversation. So I found myself thinking, and the key with emotions, we feel before we know what the heck's going on. And I felt myself sort of getting clammy, getting upset. My heart rate was up. I thought, what the heck's going on? So I kind of, retreated. And then I thought, I can't retreat. I've got to get into this conversation in this learning group. But I had to be cognizant of how to do that. Anyway, crucial conversation was necessary before our next learning group. And we had a good chance to talk through things. So what does this do? This was a trigger for me. I didn't recognize this until a couple other situations where my trigger was being co-facilitating with a white male in my age range, because all I could think about is how I had to fight for being noticed, being respected, being heard. So I had to work on that emotion for myself. So that, and I have to say, I think I've done a pretty good job with that, but it's just, that's one of my stories. I've got lots of others, but anyway, to look at this wheel of emotions, when I first saw this, I thought, oh my goodness, this is so busy. And I just want you to focus on, we're going to talk a few minutes about the primary emotions. There's 8 of them. There probably are some more, and some researchers have found more, but let's just look at this. Look at the yellow, and we're going to go clockwise. The middle circle, joy, and the opposite of joy is sadness in the middle circle. And then we go to trust, and if you follow that in the line down to distrust, to disgust. So these are the opposite of each other. We also have an intensity with this cone. As you go to the cone, it's obviously greater intensity. For joy, you have ecstasy, the birth of a child, a marriage, whatever. And these are things that are hardwired in our DNA. We're basically born with these, and they're shaped by our childhood, shaped by our the communities in which we live and in which we exist. But just have a good awareness of this is all what's going on as far as primary. There's lots of secondary emotions. If we look at joy and then go to the left, where's the anticipation, and then optimism. We have optimism when we're joyful and we're anticipating this upcoming marriage or upcoming birth of our child. So this is one of two iceberg slides that I have. And this is a range of emotions. Anger iceberg, I'm angry, one of the words we use. But I challenge people, when you feel this and you feel some of those primary emotions we talked about, think below the surface. What am I angry about? Is it because I feel that I'm embarrassed about something? I'm anxious? I'm not being recognized? We have a lot going on. And if you really want to be emotionally intelligent about your emotions and who you are, you need to be thinking about this. Because, Bill would say this so often when we would have the crucial conversations. We have to know what our part is in any kind of a situation. And if we don't stop and become more self-aware of what is bugging me, because the other thought is, do I really know myself that well? It's amazing what we find out. On the science behind our emotions, we had a great neurosurgeon talking about this topic at the last CELA. So we're looking at the limbic brain, which is the reptilian ancient brain that's been there to protect us from all of the scary things when way, millennial ago. The fight, flight, and freeze stress response, that's where it happens. And this is where our emotions live. And what happens is the emotions we feel before the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of our brain, ever has a chance to say what's going on. I want you to just be cognizant of this. You see that the prefrontal cortex in milliseconds is disconnected because the limbic brain takes over. But here on the prefrontal cortex side, you've got all of it's listed: empathy, response flexibility, intuition, fear modulation. Looking at the amygdala, which is that almond-shaped, if you can see in the picture to the left, the green almond-shaped structure, this is where the emotions are stored and processed, recognizes potential threats. It's called the amygdala. So back in the 90s or so, Daniel Goleman came up with this amygdala hijack. What is happening is biological changes are occurring. We have that fight or flight response is activated. It may be like, oh God, I need to have this conversation, and I'd rather just run away from it. I just want to hide from it. And again, the disconnecting from the neocortex. So here's, if you see somebody really sweating, or, you can feel your own heartbeat rapidly beating, these are the physical indications. And there's a lot of work around these visual aspects of emotions. So just know what's going on. You're trembling, it's like my heart's beating so fast. Maybe there's something that you need to pay attention to, be more self-aware of. Any of the people here who perhaps know some of the tennis history know John McEnroe, who was known for some of these antics, very volatile. This particular video shows him with a facial recognition that he's not real happy with what the umpire said. And as he gradually walks closer to the umpire, you can physically see this body changing. And he just hauls off and says what he says to the umpire. He's been triggered and he's losing it. You have angry bosses. We all have those. So we need to think about how are we going to deal with this? So this is where writing that email is good. You can process it. Just don't send that email. Don't send that text to you. Give yourself time, whether it's through the mindfulness or whatever, to just connect with the neocortex. It may take hours, and figure out whether what you were going to send was really the right thing to do. There's a saying, I would say, when is right always the right thing to be? Better to be wise than to be right. Think about that. It is so important. So what can you do is what we just talked about, is to know what's going on, better understand what's going on, manage your emotions. Think about what I just said. It's better to be wise than to be right. Here is a type of breathing that is used a lot, particularly in the military. It's a 4-second breathe through your nose and hold it for the count of 4. Exhale for a count of 4 and hold that empty breath for a count of 4. Get curious about what's happening with you. This poor person is clearly angry. I hope he knows what he's angry about and how he knows how to handle it. So another iceberg that we see a lot in our programs, it's important to know that words, tonality, body language, and gestures is what we all see of each other. And what I mentioned a few seconds ago about body language, we can see it. If you're alert, if you're intuitive enough, you see it in people. I like this quote from Susan David, who's an author and has written a book on emotional agility. Our raw feelings can be the messengers we need to teach us things about ourselves and can prompt insights into important life directions. We need to be curious about ourselves. We need to be curious about our people, our employees, our colleagues, our children, our significant others. When we ask questions, perhaps to probe a little bit in an inquiry sort of way, the question is, do you ask the question and then stop and listen, wait for the other person to speak before you're interjecting yourself? And just really taking control of your emotions, because if you don't understand this, what is in the deep structure in all of us is our core beliefs, our values, our biases, prejudices, fears, dreams, feelings, and so on. We're complicated human beings, and this is so important to understand it. You have to understand who you are. One of our earlier slides. Emotional triggers. We have the amygdala hijack happens. The body is experiencing these threats. So in the workplace, these are 5 common culprits of the amygdala hijacking. In the chat, if you could put, which of these have you personally experienced from your own amygdala hijacking? Have you felt that you've been treated unfairly? You may have something other than these 5. Not being shown respect, being unappreciated, a feeling you're not listened or heard, feeling pressured by unrealistic expectations. Again, let's just take another 10, 15 seconds, but think about what goes on for you in the workplace. And Kadir will read off what some of those might be.
Preeti says, not being heard and noticed. Susan, being treated unfairly. Sala, treated unfairly. Irene, all of them. Jehun, being unappreciated. Carla Gach, feeling pressured by unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, I mean, people, these are our feelings. This is how, you know, being in a workplace, we're in often we're in intense pressure. We are trying to make a point. We're not being heard. This is a trigger. Learn your triggers, learn to handle them. So as part of that, be curious, ask questions of yourself. If your prefrontal cortex could speak, what would it be saying when triggered? So this is what you can do. So you can start asking yourself these questions, particularly when you're working with someone or talking with someone, again, spouse, kids, colleagues. We're working off of a lot of assumptions that we're pretty sure are right? So are you sure that that's how the other person really feels, what you're assuming? Could you have misunderstood the situation? Are you jumping to conclusions? Are there alternative explanations that might be worth considering? And is the worst case that you're worried about likely to happen? So triggers ignite an emotional hijack in your brain. Have a plan to take back control. First step towards emotional balance. We are human. We're all negatively affected by triggers. Important to be able to bounce back. It's called resiliency when knocked down. So beginning to wrap up here, we're going to close out. So we're looking at resilient leaders. Resilient leaders are leaders who are connected to their bodies. And when emotion knocks, they feel it. And very importantly, they pay attention to it, what's going on. Understand that the conscious experience of emotional reactions, our feelings, are shaped by personal experiences, beliefs, and memories. This is all part of self-awareness. So closing out on this topic, I love this picture actually in the quote. If you understand your own feelings, you get a really great handle on how you're doing, how you're going to interact and perform with others. So one of the first starting points is what's going on inside of me. How we live is what makes us real. Moving into empathy, we've probably all heard this quote by Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you say. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how they made you feel. And this is so true. I mean, in our academies, particularly in the CELA, when we do our projects, this is something we hear so much about. Don't necessarily do PowerPoints, and here we are using PowerPoints, but help people feel what you feel. This is really what empathy is about. So empathy is feeling with people. And you see a lot of words on this slide. And there's, you just have to stop and think about who are some of those leaders that you respect and for whom you wanted to work for and with. What was it that drew you to that person? Were they empathetic? Were they humble? Were their communication skills such that they listened? Remember, empathy is feeling with people. And if you develop empathy, these are skills. I just want to just keep saying that. These skills can be learned. So looking at empathy, an empathetic response is, I get it. I feel with you. I've been there. Now, you may not have experienced the exact event as the person that you're with, loss of a spouse, a child, whatever that is, but you have been in that state of grief and being similar to what that person is going through. Understand that that is empathy. Do not give a sympathetic response. Gee, I really feel sorry for you. I mean, gosh, it's like, what do you mean? Oh, you poor thing. If you think that's bad, well, at least, I mean, Brene Brown, you may be familiar with Brene Brown, has a great cartoon. And it's something that, just think about this, that when somebody, has a miscarriage and the woman is distraught, and the other person with them will say, oh, just, you always can keep trying. You can, be grateful you have other children. Do not say those things. Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. So it's like, you're telling me how to react. It really does drive disconnection. Workplace. There is a workplace empathy, and it matters. Leaders will show empathy. It shows up with a willingness to help employees with personal problems. We've certainly experienced work and personal life are more intertwined in these crisis situations that we're in. Recognize signs of overwork before burnout. Perhaps each week, take a few minutes, check in with your team members. Show sincere interest in the needs and hopes of others. At work, work to understand the unique needs and strengths of each of your team members. How many of you have done that? And to show compassion when others disclose a personal loss. Empathy is a tool that leaders can use to establish connection and trust with your colleagues and your employees. This is another model that is familiar, and I just show it as being a little bit redundant perhaps, but it just, the center of that, the core is empathy. So resilient leaders, why is it important to develop emotional intelligence? We're wrapping up here. We have, it's fundamental to flourishing as a leader. We humans are emotional and social creatures, and it will boost connection, performance, and communications. So my commitment to you all today has been to help you understand these skills. And so I ask you, what is one commitment you will make to improve your emotional intelligence as a resilient leader? Think about it. Jot it down when you have a few minutes this morning, tonight, different time zones here, as to what your responsibility is. As I mentioned earlier, we all have strengths and unique strengths, and God has given many of us, all of us, these gifts, and it's important that we share these gifts, and we share them in a much better situation when we have emotional intelligence. The secret of change is to focus all of your energy, not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Socrates. This is just a snapshot of a EQ assessment, and emotional intelligence assessment, that actually both Bill and I, just a year ago, Bill, we were getting certified in taking and administering this particular assessment. I want to show this to you because there are 15 elements here. For each of the main sections, the self-perception, there's 3: self-regard, self-actualization, emotional self-awareness, the area that we've been talking a lot about. The rest of them have similar elements that are important. This is what a report looks like when somebody takes that particular assessment. If you have any questions or information, more information you'd like about this, please feel free to reach out. And I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate all that that you are, for all of you that you're here. And so we'll turn this over to Kadir for any Q&A, and I'll just put a big thank you from me to all of you. And my contact information, if anybody wants to follow up. So Kadir, it's turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Paulette, for a very interesting and useful, helpful learning webinar, and this very interesting topic of emotional intelligence and what resilient leadership means. There are questions we have from Bill Starnes. I will read them to you. Please use the Q&A box if you have questions for Paulette. I will read them to you, Paulette, so that she could answer. Can you talk about the linkage between emotional trigger and values? Where do our values reside in the brain? And Bill also wants you to talk about the importance of understanding not only how we see ourselves, but also understanding how others see us.
Yeah, I mean, triggers, yeah, it's a violation of, using a strong word when I say violation, someone is stepping on a value that we hold dear. And for example, for me, it's fairness. It is, being able to share things. And so when I mentioned that particular situation, I was, I was upset. So it really does reside, and I think that a lot of our thinking, our values, when we think about that, is in more of the prefrontal cortex. It's because we've thought about this, and that is the thinking part of the brain. So we need to really excuse me, incorporate that part of the brain when we're in these kinds of situations. So I don't know if I captured all of that, Kadir.
We have a question from Amida Faiziva. Dear Paulette, thank you for information shared with us. Very useful. My question is, can you please recommend day-to-day exercises for developing emotional intelligence?
Thank you for the question. I think the thing to think about with emotional intelligence is that these are skills. They are skills that become habits through practice. So rather than trying to take on everything, take self-awareness. Perhaps start journaling in the morning or journal at night, whatever works for you. How was my day? How did I show up at work, at home? Could I have been better? And as I mentioned, when I was examining my triggers, I have to say that some of this was just recognition over fairly recent time frame in the last year or two. So it takes continuous work to be honest with yourself, and to the mindfulness practice. It's so important. But some people may prefer that. They may prefer journaling. You may prefer a walk, going for a walk. Just think about, how am I going to be better? Because you need these skills to be an effective leader. And if you want to grow in those leadership skills and leadership positions, you want to be that CEO. Many of you are CEOs of your organizations. What are you doing? Are you self-aware of how you're treating your employees? How are you treating your family? This has been a tough year. So be honest with yourself, but pick one area of a practice that works for you, and do it every day. Do it as often as you can. That's how a habit is formed. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Paulette. There's an interesting question from Shirzot Katahodjaev from CELA, Uzbekistan. Hi, Paulette. Tell me, please, how you feel about firing employees?
Hi, Shirzad. Nice to hear from you. Good question in the sense of, if you are a leader, you have a heart, think about how you're going to give that kind of news to that employee. You have to make tough decisions as a leader. If someone is not performing, perhaps it's not the right position, the right job for that individual. Approach it with heart, and just be as cognizant, as really self-aware of what that person might be going through and how you can help them. Hopefully that helps.
There's a question from Nala. Mila, would too much resilience be harmful? Like you deviate from main goal to accommodate everyone?
Hi, Nala. I don't, I think there's always a shadow side of strengths. If you overdo things, you can perhaps be not as effective. But when you look at the resilience is coming from tough situations that you have moved through. And think about how you can use that resilience to get yourself through the next situation, because there will always be another next situation. And if you develop resiliency to the point where you think you're just can't be broken, and that you're the strong, confident, macho person, that isn't good. Sometimes we can overdo things. So again, I go back to self-awareness. How is that showing up? There's a whole side of coaching that talks about the shadow part, which is, things that we are doing because we think we're so strong. It's not quite the definition, but it's the essence of that. But resilience with emotional intelligence will help you in many situations. Thank you for the question.
There's a question from Carla Gach. Her question is, should we show our emotions? Hiding it might be harmful at some point.
So you have to use your common sense about this. There are people who, and I am one of them, many of you know, I'm an Italian. I'm an emotional person. And, it's like emotions come up, they well up in me. And if they well up in you, and you don't have a way to express them in a way that might be appropriate. If you're in a meeting, for example, and you're starting to lose it, excuse yourself. Leave the room until you can regain. You are being triggered. Try to regain some of that prefrontal cortex thinking. And it's like, sometimes I would say, I answer a question. It's because my intuition, my gut is telling me this. And you may have a boss who says, but I don't want gut. I don't want intuition. I want facts and figures. You have to learn to balance those. But be aware, again, of the situation. If you're in a crucial conversation and things are not going well, and you feel emotions, again, take yourself out of the situation. Just say, I need some time to regroup. And in some cultures, it's probably much more difficult to have emotions. But having said that, probably in the work environment, it is not always the easiest thing to do, but try to figure out a plan, try to figure out a way how you're going to deal with it. And sometimes it's just, you're going to tear up. I mean, it just comes on. So somebody once told me, don't apologize for your tears. So, but use your common sense. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Paulette. There's a question from Talgat. Except for breathing, what kind of technique can be used for calming down?
Well, mindfulness. I mean, I just had something recently come to my attention. I've been using it again. It is a form of mindfulness, but it's like breathe in, calm, exhale, stress. And if you just did that 6 times and allowed yourself to calm down, sometimes just excusing yourself, like I said before, and leaving the environment in which you find yourself being triggered. If you don't want to make a fool of yourself, or if you want to really gain control so that you can address a problem, an issue in a way that works better, just allow yourself to do that. Be aware of what's going on in your body. Remember, people are seeing this because of the body gestures, and that we don't see as much since we're in virtual, but we do have the opportunity. And again, for some people, it is journaling. I mean, I had a very stressful situation a while back, and I just, one morning, one evening, just started writing and learning to process and learning to breathe. I mean, I'm not the best at this, but I try to remember to do it, particularly in those stressful situations.
Thank you, Paulette. There's a question from Riot. How can you translate emotional intelligence to the digital age now that a lot of personal communication is not face-to-face and the unified environment is no longer the case?
That is very tough to do. And there's been a lot of good articles written about that particular problem, because when we're facing each other, in one-on-one situations, if you are self-aware, you will pick up on what's happening with that other person. They're either tuning you out, they're making a connection. Virtual, one of the reasons that Kadira and I wanted to open this up earlier on is to be able to have that kind of one-to-one with people that we love dearly throughout our programs and our academies. And it's just something that is being lost. And what we can do perhaps is just keep talking about it. Keep saying, as we start a program, allow some interaction. As you are dealing with some issues, talk about what it is to be a leader. Talk about self-awareness, listening, asking questions, be curious. You can still do that verbally. And so much of emotional intelligence is verbal. So think about the use of the words that are stronger emotionally in the situations that can warrant that. It's tougher. I mean, that's why we all want to get back to hugging each other and being in the same room with each other. Many of us, not all of us.
Thank you, Paulette. There's a question from Umida again. Thank you for the answer for my previous question. One more question. Smile. How to switch from a worker role, for example, to some other social role quickly. For example, the role of a family man, a mother. This was especially a big issue during the period of self-isolation, when this role switching never stops and demands sometimes a few seconds.
Yeah, I guess I could answer one way by saying We need to be as authentic to ourselves as possible, which means the way we show up in the workplace is the way we show up at home or in our community. Now, I totally recognize that that's not always possible, and that we tend to shortchange the people who are closest to us, our families, our partners, our spouses, our children, because we're taking that stress, that anger home with us from the workplace. So perhaps thinking about how you can deal with those issues in the workplace so that some of those triggers and some of that reaction can be modulated, can be dealt with, so that when you go home, you are not carrying it home. And of course, we're home now. We're work and home all in one place. And it is not easy. My daughter's an adult, and I don't have a lot of the issues that many of you are struggling with. The sun is really shining into my face. And try to have patience, and with your children, try to have some conversations. I noticed that you're really upset. Can you tell Mom, what's bothering you? Let's talk about something. But perhaps if you're coming off of a workplace issue, you need to start thinking about what your plan is to deal with that workplace issue in a way that perhaps moves you out of an anger or whatever that feeling might be. So thank you for the question. It's tough. It's tough for all of you.
Paulette, there's a question from Sala. How can you re-energize yourself to become more resilient with your emotions as a leader, more peaceful within?
I love that question because I am someone who, as I mentioned, I am emotional. I totally accept that. And I love that about myself. So I think that if you are self-confident with the fact that you are resilient, you're willing to take those risks, be proud of that and keep working at it, because you find that people come to you and you find that people are comfortable around you. And it could be lots of different reasons. It could be that you have a sense of not only self-awareness, of course, self-regulation of what you say and how you say things, and an empathy with people. I go back to what I was saying. Use that empathy and be comfortable in your skin. I mean, that's why I was so thrilled to see the Deloitte study. Yes, it is about heart and head, and the people with good soft skills, the emotional intelligence skills, can make hard decisions. Just because you're a collaborator, which is so important in today's workplace, does not mean you cannot make decisions, but rather you are hearing from everyone. That is showing respect. So when you are resilient and have a good grasp of these things, I think you're overall just much more respectful to others. So thank you.
This seems to be the last question from our participants, from our friends. Unless there's, we've already gone for a little over an hour. And I suggest that we continue our conversation, if Paulette, you have time, in a Zoom meeting, link to which I'm putting in the chat box. But there seems to be no more question. Thank you so much, Paulette, for your time, for sharing knowledge, expertise, and your experience with all of us and everybody has learned so much more about what it means to be a resilient leader, what resilient leadership embodies, and how emotional intelligence affects or impacts us all.
Well, thank you, Kadir. Again, thank you for the invitation. And it was so wonderful, at least seeing some of you and certainly hearing from some of you. So have a wonderful day. And those that celebrate the upcoming holiday season, thinking of you all. So love you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Paulette.